Imagine this. You're standing eye to eye with a warrior who doesn't flinch at pain, doesn't hesitate at the thought of death, and fights with the raw, animal power of a raging bear. Most people today think they know what Viking warfare looked like. Images of bearded men, axes in hand, charging across muddy fields while their war cries echo through the air. But the Berserkers? They were something else entirely. These weren't simply fearless fighters. They were men who crossed the line of humanity itself, transforming into something monstrous, something so terrifying that entire armies broke ranks and fled at the mere sight of them. And make no mistake, if you ever found yourself facing one, your fight would be over in seconds. So what gave these warriors their nightmarish reputation? That's exactly what we're diving into. How they transformed their minds and bodies, the almost supernatural powers they displayed in combat, and the chilling accounts of battles where their fury alone shifted the outcome of wars. So tell me, if you suddenly found yourself face to face with one of these fearsome warriors, would you stand your ground or turn and run? Drop your answer in the comments. I'd love to see what you do. Let's begin with the very word itself. Berserker. From Old Norse, it translates to bear shirt or bear shirt. That's no coincidence. According to 13th century historian Snorri Sturluson, Berserkers hurled themselves into battle without armor, biting into their shields like rabid beasts, howling as if possessed, and striking down enemies with the force of bears or oxen. Even more astonishing, chroniclers claimed that neither fire nor steel could harm them. Think about that for a second. Warriors so fearless they charged half-naked into combat, yet so unstoppable that blows from swords or axes seemed useless against them. They didn't just fight, they unleashed a chaos no one could withstand. The heart of this transformation was something the Norse called Berserker gang, literally the Berserker's rage. This wasn't ordinary aggression. This was a trance-like frenzy where man blurred into beast. In this state, they howled like wolves, foamed at the mouth, and tore into shields with their teeth. Their eyes rolled back until only the whites showed, and their voices turned into sounds described as inhuman. But here's what really made them terrifying. Once the frenzy took over, pain meant nothing. Wounds that would have crippled or killed a normal man barely slowed them down. They fought on with arrows sticking out of their flesh, with gashes so deep they should have bled out in minutes. Chronicles even describe berserkers shaking off strikes that would have dropped 3 ordinary warriors at once. And their strength? Legendary. The sagas tell of berserkers snapping spears in their bare hands, splintering shields apart, and tossing grown men as if they were children. They struck with such speed, savagery, and intensity that opponents often froze before they could even raise their weapons. More than skill, it was terror itself that won them battles. Now, the great question, how did they do it? How did ordinary men transform into these terrifying beasts of war? Historians have debated this for centuries. Some suggest they used powerful psychoactive substances. Hallucinogenic mushrooms like Amanita muscaria or the plant henbane could induce hallucinations, rage, and an almost superhuman resistance to pain. Henbane especially was notorious. It could be eaten, smoked, brewed into beer, or even smeared on the skin. Its effects came on fast, turning men violent, fearless, and eerily detached from reality. But the price was steep. After the frenzy wore off, they were described as weak as newborn infants, barely able to stand. And this lines up perfectly with sagas describing berserkers collapsing after battle, utterly drained. But here's the catch, drugs alone can't explain it. These weren't just intoxicated warriors stumbling into battle. No, what we're seeing is something far deeper. Ritual, belief, psychology, and biology all intertwined. These were not ordinary fighters. They belonged to cults sworn to Odin, the Norse god of war, death, and fury. Their loyalty wasn't expressed through prayers alone, but through shamanic rituals, sacred rites designed to channel the raw spirits of animals. Bears, wolves, creatures of predatory instinct and relentless strength, became their spiritual guides. Through these strange ceremonies, the berserkers would abandon their ordinary human consciousness and slip into a state where their minds and bodies behaved like something wild, something no longer fully human. Archaeology even backs this up. In Sweden, the 6th century Torslanda plates depict warriors donning animal pelts and fearsome masks, standing alongside Odin himself. On these pieces of fine metalwork, objects reserved for the elite, we see what appear to be berserkers cloaked in wolf or bear skins. These weren't crude doodles. They were expensive, high-status artifacts, which means berserkers weren't just legend. They were important enough to be immortalized in art for generations. And the transformation wasn't only spiritual, it was physical. A berserker's very appearance was meant to strike terror. They wrapped themselves in bear hides or wolf skins, believing the garments themselves helped them embody the power of the beast. They practiced ritualistic movements, copying the way wolves stalked or how bears struck with crushing power. Some even vanished into the wilderness for years, living like wild animals, perfecting their ability to think and move as predators before returning to the world of men. When it came to war, berserkers were used like living weapons. Viking chieftains often unleashed them as shock troops, the terrifying vanguard of a raid. Their role was simple: break the enemy before the real battle began. Picture this: you're a medieval soldier, sword and shield in hand, bracing for combat. Suddenly, you hear it, the guttural, inhuman howls echoing across the field. Then you see them, hulking figures draped in animal skins, eyes rolled back, moving with speed that doesn't seem natural. They gnash their teeth, bite their shields, and foam spills from their mouths like rabid beasts. At that moment, all your training, all your discipline, counts for nothing. Fear takes hold before a single sword swing is exchanged. And that was the true brilliance of the Berserker. Their strength was terrifying, yes, but their absence of fear made them unstoppable. Ordinary soldiers, even the most skilled, still carried the instinct for self-preservation. They dodged, they retreated, they hesitated when death loomed close. Berserkers had none of that. They did not fear wounds, they did not care about survival. They would charge headfirst into spear walls, wrestle multiple opponents at once, and keep fighting even while pierced by mortal blows. Their frenzy made them less like men and more like living storms of destruction. Take the Battle of Stiklestad in 1030. Accounts are debated, yes, but many sources suggest Berserker-type warriors fought there, turning what was already a brutal clash between King Olaf II of Norway and his enemies into a nightmare. Whether or not every detail can be confirmed, the psychological impact is undeniable. Imagine standing in that shield wall, your sword ready, your courage intact. Suddenly, the battlefield erupts with screams that sound nothing like human voices. You see towering men in animal pelts charging with frothing mouths and blank, possessed eyes. Before you even raise your blade, you feel terror hollow out your stomach. Some of your comrades break ranks and flee, and in that instant, your courage shatters too. This wasn't madness without purpose, it was tactical terror. Viking commanders understood the value of fear. Berserkers were placed at the very front. Their rage meant to smash enemy morale before the true battle lines ever clashed. One berserker could rout a dozen regular soldiers simply by being there, his reputation a weapon sharper than any axe. But what about those who didn't flee? What about the warriors who stood their ground? The sagas give us the answer: chaos. Berserkers could overwhelm multiple opponents at once. Unlike ordinary fighters, who relied on strategy, technique, and defense, berserkers fought with wild, reckless aggression. They grabbed spears thrust toward them, snapped the shafts in two, and turned the splintered wood into weapons. When disarmed, they bit and clawed like animals, tearing into flesh with their teeth. Witnesses swore these men continued to fight through wounds that should have killed 3 ordinary warriors, striking until the last breath left their bodies. Some chronicles speak of berserkers fighting on even with their intestines spilling out, or with arrows jutting grotesquely from their chests as if they were nothing more than splinters. And yet, their true horror wasn't just in their brute strength, nor in the illusion of invulnerability did they carry into battle. It was in their sheer unpredictability. A normal soldier? He follows rhythm and logic. He fights in patterns, blocks when threatened, strikes when given an opening. His actions can be read, anticipated, countered. But the berserker? He shattered all logic of combat. One moment he'd be swinging an axe with terrifying precision, and the next, he'd throw his weapon aside, hurl himself at enemies barehanded, and tear at their flesh like a beast. He might crash headlong into a wall of spears without hesitation, as if death itself meant nothing. How do you defend yourself against an enemy who obeys no rules, who cannot be baited, who seems deaf to pain, blind to fear, and consumed only with the frenzy of the hunt? Your carefully learned sword drills, your years of battlefield experience, your hardened courage, none of it would prepare you for facing something that barely seemed human anymore. And here's the truth. This wasn't some isolated myth about a handful of wild men. Berserkers weren't lone wolves. They were part of organized warrior cults, spread across Scandinavia for generations. They had their own rituals, their own training, even a strange warrior's code of conduct, if you could call it that. Young men would devote their entire lives to perfecting this terrifying transformation, abandoning their humanity piece by piece until all that remained was a predator in human skin. But for all their terrifying glory on the battlefield, outside of war, they were often viewed as a plague on society. Villagers and townsfolk feared them not just as warriors but as criminals, violent men who terrorized their own people, men who stole, raped, and killed with the same animal ferocity they unleashed in war. Imagine living in a farming community and knowing men like this could descend at any time. These were warriors who deliberately trained themselves to cast off every trace of civilization. And that's why, eventually, society turned against them. By the 11th century, Christianity had taken deeper root in Scandinavia, and structured kingdoms had no tolerance for these uncontrollable predators. Kings outlawed them. Communities branded them as criminals. In Norway, King Erik Hakanarsson banned berserkers outright. By the 13th century, Icelandic law went even further. The Gragas Code specifically outlawed berserker gangs, declaring anyone who took part in this madness an outlaw, fit for punishment or death. Priests condemned them as servants of the devil. Farmers wanted peace and stability, not warriors who might just as easily burn their homes as defend them. And so the berserkers faded. Their secret rituals, their strange initiations, whatever herbs, chants, or shamanic rites they used to achieve their transformations, all of it disappeared with them. We will never fully know whether their legendary frenzy came from drugs, spiritual possession, years of savage training, or perhaps all three combined. What we do know is that for centuries, these men struck such fear into Europe that their reputation still echoes in our collective imagination. By the 12th century, the last true berserkers vanished into history. With them ended one of the most terrifying military traditions the world has ever seen. No modern army, no elite fighting unit has ever tried to recreate what they became, the deliberate remaking of men into beasts of war. And here's the question for you: could you survive facing one? If we're being honest, probably not. Even professional medieval soldiers, men who lived, ate, and breathed combat, often broke and fled at the first sight of them. What chance would you or I have? Your gym training, your modern martial arts, your confidence, none of it would hold up when you're standing before a man foaming at the mouth, howling like a wolf, and charging straight through your defenses without the slightest hesitation. The Viking Berserker is one of the strangest, most terrifying figures in human history. Men who willingly abandoned their own humanity to become living weapons. They weren't just fighters. They were nightmares given flesh, ripping through enemies with a fury no shield could withstand. But that transformation came at a terrible price. Yes, they were feared, but they were also despised. Outlaws, hunted, treated like a curse on society itself. For a time, they ruled the battlefields of Northern Europe, their rage rewriting the very meaning of war. But in the end, even their legend could not save them. Entire kingdoms outlawed them, whole communities drove them away, and history itself buried them like a plague best forgotten. And that's the chilling truth about the Berserkers. They weren't fantasy, they weren't movie heroes, they were real. Flesh and blood men who burned so hot, so violently, that they ultimately destroyed not only their enemies but themselves. Now I want to hear from you. If you had lived in the Viking Age, would you have feared them or tried to fight alongside them? Drop your answer in the comments below. Before you go, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Vassal Truths. We bring you the hidden, brutal, and fascinating truths that history tried to bury. Stay curious, because the past has far darker secrets than you think.